So in this presentation, I'm just going to get into how we in Warrior Flow see training and why it's important to train in skills, whatever those skills are that you're going to need up front. I'm not going to go through this word for word. I'm just going to cover some of the key points that you just need to understand. And this brief will be made available as a download for the people who are buying this program. So we're talking about relationships. We're talking about causal relationships to combat and how we actually do things. And so this construct is basically what we teach. This is all about the physics, the time and space, but also the physiological aspects of how we perceive information sensorially, take that information, and then we apply it. It almost creates like a precognition because we learn how to recognize patterns through training up front to where we get to a point where we can perceive events within time and space so quickly that we're able to make adjustments when we're dealing with another person. And that's really what you're trying to do in training. You're trying to train yourself to a level where it's not only automatic in what you do, but that you recognize the patterns of the other person's motion so quickly that you can take action, but not just following their action, not just countering or even adapting, but actually getting ahead of what they're going to do because you kind of know where they got to get to in order to harm you. And this is that subconsciousness, this thing that, where we talk about how we just seem to know things, or what we call in Warrior Flow body certainty, that ability to just know without knowing. You just know things. So when we talk about how we perceive information, there's the event or the perception of the event, and then there's also brain processing speed. What you're looking at is in this kind of layout, and I'm just laying this out for an example, is something that represents 1 second in time, and then all the different things that happen in the human body. So there's the event, and then there's brain processing speed and interpretation. And that processing speed is usually between 13 to 70 microseconds. And we're processing literally like 11 million bits of data that fast. When you look at human reaction time is between 150 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds, but the average person is usually around 250. And there are some people, like your world-class sprinters, for example, and race car drivers, their reactions are actually even below that, around 100 to 120 milliseconds. But the range runs between 150 milliseconds to almost 1/3 of a second or 300 milliseconds. However, conscious perception of when we actually recognize something took place takes place around 400 milliseconds to 500, give or take. We usually say 500 just to keep it easy. The point is, we actually respond to an event, perceive it, respond, but we don't actually recognize it until after the fact. In other words, it already happened. So then what happens is, through training, what you're trying to do is you're trying to develop skill to what we call the subconscious competence level of skill. And within that, there are actually 2 levels, or what we call causal levels. There's one causal level from the time we would actually perceive that we did something to when we actually recognized and started the process of processing that information. And that is roughly around, it's like 10,000 times faster than conscious perception. But there's another level that's 10 times faster than that, or 100,000 times faster than conscious perception. And that's really the deep, deep skill where things are so automatic, like you're not even aware of what you're doing. And that's really where we always try to get everything, or most of our skills, as much as possible. One of the things, though, I want to point out is you don't want a skill to necessarily get so automatic in training that you're doing it so thoughtlessly that you actually will do something and make a mistake. So you're trying to also find this kind of embodiment, or what is called embodied cognition, whereas there's a little bit of awareness of what's going on still, so that should something change in your environment, you can change. So how we take in the information again, or what we call Warrior Flow perceptual awareness, there's visualization, proximity, pattern recognition, of course, embodied cognition, and internal and exteroception, basically the internal feel of how we perceive things and also what we're perceiving externally. Eventually, it forms what we call body certainty. Again, knowing without knowing. And this is where we find adumbration, that ability to get a foreshadowing of things, or through training, reverse bifurcation, where we know where a person has to get to say injure us, and we've already deduced all the things and the steps through training that we have to do in order to prevent that from happening. Some people even call it, retrocausality, which, in the quantum physics world, I just threw that in there. They actually talk about it, whereas we perceive the event, but we already know the future. And so everything is kind of drawn toward the future versus the other way around. And it's in this realm, this is where we get the creativity, the intuition, this body of knowledge that we can draw upon, where, as the great Steve Jobs used to always say, and I love this quote, that creativity is the ability to connect the dots as you go along. But it's not just also connecting the dots, it's also understanding through intuition and wisdom of when something is not right, or when you're trying to do something and realizing it's not going to work, and learning how to give something up, or learning how to stop doing what you're doing and then create something new. Eventually, again, you develop this resident knowledge. So what I've done here is I flipped it now back into the right order. I had it in reverse order first so that I can kind of talk through it, but this is the right order. You have this body of knowledge that's already sitting out there due to training. Then something happens, and on the subconscious competence level, you perceive something happening in the body sensorially. Then your body processes it. By the time your body processes it, again, that's that 13 to 70 milliseconds we were talking about. And then from when you actually start taking action is somewhere between, again, for the average person, between, 150 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds, probably closer to around 250 or 200 milliseconds. The point is, it happens very fast. It's much faster than when we can consciously be aware of what we did, because we're not aware of it till after the fact. And then eventually you start developing the knowledge base to have these leading indicators where you just know within the pre-event something is up. You start getting like that sixth sense. And we've all experienced this. You do it actually when you drive a car, where you're always anticipating what's going to go on. This is what we call, in sports and martial arts, muscle memory. But the reality is, it's not so much muscle memory as it's muscle thought. In other words, muscle memory are the things you've done where you have this requisite knowledge, this resident knowledge. Muscle thought is the actual creativity of what you do with that knowledge. And those things become leading indicators, within the pre-event, based again on that knowledge. And finally, you reach a stage, and this is where we're talking about this kind of almost precognitive development, where you have a level of resident skill and knowledge that is built up, whereas you're just responding to stimuli in your environment. You're just responding to whatever is going on, and you're able to take action flawlessly. This is what we call in warrior flow mastery. Mastery for us is not, becoming a master where you can teach it, do all these other things. Mastery for us is the ability to be able to do even the most basic things and execute them, without almost any thought, in relatively short period of time, almost flawlessly. It doesn't even have to be perfect. You just have to be successful. As we continue to train, what ends up happening is also too, there's this kind of recursive loop or learning loop where every time we have an experience, or every time the experience is altered in the slightest, it gets fed back into the body, where we develop a certain body certainty, where we're able to just anticipate change in our environment. We do this all the time. Like I said, when you first learn how to drive a car, and I've said in other videos, you're nervous because, you don't want to get into an accident. You want to hit nothing. Over time, through trial and error, you learn so many skills, but because those skills are at the subconscious competence level, half the time when you're driving, you're not even aware of all the different things you do. And it's only in a situation where something catches your attention out of the ordinary, or you almost get into an accident, or somebody pulls out on you, that, you get startled. But most of the times when people do something, you basically just respond to it, and then, of course, everybody curses everybody out after the fact. But the point is, you don't just run into someone. And so We do the same thing all the time in our body, whether we're training ourselves how to fight, whether we're training ourselves in baseball to field a baseball on a certain awkward angle, whether we're playing football, whatever it is. These are the kind of things that we're capable of doing. And that's what this model is built on. How the human brain and how the human body working together actually does these things, actually allows you to be able to train to the subconscious competence level where you just reach a stage of development where basically you just know without knowing. And isn't that kind of the point of training yourself and practicing and doing things? So this is just to give you an understanding of the way in which we go about training and the philosophy of why we train the way we train in Warrior Flow, where it doesn't matter what it is we're training, we're trying to get people in terms of skill development always to this place of body certainty, the ability to know without knowing, so that they can be successful, so that should they have to defend themselves, the last thing they should be thinking about is what they got to do with their body, and should be thinking about what they have to do to the bad guy, the enemy.